Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. And I hope you enjoy this new show, whether you're viewing it on the internet or listening to a podcast version of the episode. I do want to thank you for being part of my audience. You can also find links to videos or podcasts on MiamiGhostChronicles.com, as well as where you can submit your story about any eerie experiences you've had, which I would love to hear about. Just go to the Submit Your Story tab. Please subscribe to our channel so that you receive notification of when we release a new show. And find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is where I usually live stream and where I give you a behind the scenes look at locations where new episodes are being filmed at. I also tell you about all the interesting guests that will be appearing soon on Stories of the Supernatural. I hope you enjoy the show, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, Stories of the Supernatural. How's everyone doing today? Well, here down in Florida, it's hot. It's only the 3rd of May, but of course I'm used to it, but still, when you're sitting right in the middle of it, and it threatens to rain, it doesn't rain, so yeah, it's kind of crazy. And as a matter of fact, I was talking with my guest just about how hot and humid and kind of crazy the weather is. She's a native New Yorker. Her name is Ellen Datlow. And I'm so thrilled because she edits just all the type of stories that I'm into big time. She's been editing for over 35 years, science fiction, fantasy, horror short fiction. She's also been a fiction editor for OMNI Magazine and an editor of Event Horizon and SCIFICTION. Now, she currently acquires short fiction for Tor, and in addition, she has edited more than 100 science fiction, fantasy, and horror anthologies, including the annual The Best Horror of the Year, Lovecraft's Monsters, Fearful Cemeteries, Nightmare Carnival, The Doll Collection, and many others. As a matter of fact, we're going to discuss something that she's been working on, which of course it has to do with ghosts. So how are you doing today, Ellen?
I'm fine. As we talked about, it's hot here.
Yes.
I don't know if it hits your hot degrees, but it's 92 degrees right now in New York.
You know what?
And 2 days ago it was like 60.
Well, yeah, it's crazy because it's like, should I go out with a coat? Shouldn't I go out with a coat? Should I take something? Shouldn't I take something? And it's over here. Like right now, it's got to be in the 80s. I haven't looked, but it's kind of humid. But I have, and so every once in a while, people will hear, my audience will hear. I have birds because I live in a 100-year-old farmhouse, and I have some birds and stuff that I keep on my porch. And every night I got to pull them in because it drops down into the 60s. And for Miami, that is crazy weather, but it's like, okay.
What kind of birds are they?
I've got cockatiels, I've got canaries, I've got finches,
Wow.
I've got a little bit of some doves. Yeah, I've got some all the above, and then a bunch of chickens running around. I've got some free range chickens running around my
Okay.
yard,
So
which
no
come to
cats.
visit me every morning, but I don't have to worry about them. They're very self-sufficient. But
Oh, that's good. Do you get their eggs? Do you
yes, I
take eggs?
do. Yes, I
I bet
do.
they're really good.
Yes, I'm very much into like the free range, and I'm real careful what I feed them. And yes, and my girls, they come and visit me. It's really funny because my desk looks out over the porch on the window, and when I don't go feed them, they'll come up and they'll look at me through the window, like, "Hey, where's the chow, man? Go get our food." And yeah, you could tell I'm a chickenista.
Mhm.
But anyway, I wanted to get up, and I asked you, but how did you end up? Was it by accident, or you pursued it as far as working in the genre, as far as science, sci-fi and fantasy horror? How did you get into that, Ellen?
Excuse me. Well, from childhood, I read a lot of. I realized looking back, I'm interviewed a lot, so by being interviewed, I actually look back and say, "Oh, this is why I did that. This is how that happened." Otherwise, I wouldn't even think about it. But I read a lot of short stories growing up. A lot of short stories in fantasy and some science fiction and some horror. I read Lovecraft and Bradbury and Harlan Ellison
Mm-hmm.
and Nathaniel Hawthorne and all kinds of things. And I didn't know anything about publishing then. I mean, when I was actually growing up, I wanted to be a veterinarian.
Okay.
because I love animals. But
Yes.
so I realized I have to take science and math, and also, and I'm terrible in them, especially
Yeah.
math.
I feel you. Believe me, I
Years
do.
later, I realized also, oh, and I have to take care of sick animals. No, so I'm like, no, I can't deal with sick animals. No, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so then it's like a little more practical. Okay, I like reading. What do you do with reading? Publishing, whatever that meant. Working in a library, working in a bookstore, and
Hmm.
I some it. I guess when after college, I got a major in English lit, and then
Okay.
I traveled in Europe for a year, and then I guess I figured, okay, now what do I do? And I'd actually worked in the SUNY at Albany Library for a time, so I knew I really didn't want to do that. Excuse me. Um, but at some point, I decided, okay, maybe should try to get into publishing, and I actually really did not know what that meant. What
Okay.
editing? I didn't know what editors did. I mean, I read anthologies. I didn't even know about. I read the best of the years. I mean, they were old. You know, in 1968, Donald Walheim did one, Terry Carr did one, and there were British ones. And I read the stories, but I didn't realize they came. I didn't really figure out where they came from. I didn't realize they came from magazines necessarily.
Okay.
Uh, so it wasn't until I don't know, 19, I guess the mid 70s that in 73 or 4 I got into book publishing. I looked for a job in book publishing as an editorial assistant, and I worked in mainstream publishing for a few years, getting nowhere slowly. And
Okay.
but while I was there, I started meeting people who were at Holt Reinhardt and Winston. I was there for 3 years, and one of the editors was publishing some science fiction. He was publishing Robert Sheckley, James Morrow's first novel, and a few other people, J.G. Ballard reprints from England.
Hmm.
And so at that time, I was maybe doing a little work for him. He was not my boss, but he knew I liked science fiction and fantasy.
Okay.
And also found out that you could do reading for book publishers. I don't know how I found this out. I really don't remember. Somehow because I didn't know about science fiction conventions. I didn't know they
Okay.
existed. So somehow I found out that, I could read for book publishers and also for the Science Fiction Book Club and also the Book of the Month Club and also 20th
All right.
Century Fox and get money for writing little reader reports.
Because
So
God, that's right. The Book of the Month Club. I remember that.
yeah, I read some really bad books that I couldn't believe were published, let alone they wanted us to pick for the Book of the Month Club. But anyway, so yes, I read science fiction for the Science Fiction Book. And then my first job in science fiction per se was the OMNI job. I mean, I basically somehow slipped into. I found out that was starting up this magazine in
Okay.
19. It actually started October 78, but I found out about it like 79.
Hmm.
And the editor who was editing Jim Morrow and those people at Holt Reinhardt and Winston told me about this new magazine. Oh, I had resigned. I quit after 3 years because I wasn't getting anywhere, but I was still friendly with people. So he told me about this magazine Omni because he had someone who was writing a nonfiction book for him, Frank Kendig, who is the editor of Omni Magazine, this new magazine of science and science fiction. So
Okay.
that's kind of how I got into that. But I also, and so basically I nagged them until they gave me a job, kind of. But before that, when I was in book publishing, I did take a few an NYU publishing course, which basically brought in people who are working in different aspects of book publishing, like
Right.
publicity, marketing, foreign rights, or rather sub rights, editorial, and gave you an idea of the different aspects of book publishing, which was very valuable. And working in mainstream publishing was
But
valuable.
still, I'm sure you must have learned so much though that working in that
Well, a
field,
lot
it's like
in depth. And the editing, actually the first thing I edited, I worked for this miserable bastard. I mean, I mean, anyone will say that. Donald I. Fine. He was infamous in the field of fiction. I mean,
he was your version of the Devil Wears Prada.
he was horrible. Oh, much worse than that. He was verbally abusive to everyone who worked for him.
Really?
In fact, twice a year or so, the building management where his office was came in and complained because people could hear him screaming next door.
Wow.
Yes. Anyway, I worked for him a miserable 6 or so months, and I started as receptionist. And I only took the job because I was desperate for another job. I
Uh-huh.
mean, people told me, don't do it, don't do it. But at this point, I was out of unemployment. I had to take something, so I took
Right.
the job. I moved in 4 months or so from receptionist. It was a very small office. I did publicity, I did subrights, edited a book, and I quit. I actually was one of the few people who resigned and didn't run out screaming or crying, rather, and just quitting. I actually gave 2 weeks' notice when he wanted me to be his assistant editor, and I said no because his assistant left after survey. I said, "Are you kidding me? No." I mean, I've been far enough away, so I resigned. But that was where I edited the first novel that I ever edited, whatever, and I had no idea what I was doing.
So something good came out of it. You just like
yeah. Well, I mean, the thing about editing anyway, you learn on the job. I mean, no one can teach you how to edit. You either can do it or you can't.
Okay.
You either and I'm not talking about copy editing, which is grammar and maybe usage of some words,
Right.
but to be an editor is something that, yes, you learn. I learn how to continually learn on the job, but it's something that someone cannot sit. The only time I ever got a lesson in editing was when I first started, before I was actually working for OMNI Magazine. I went in and was begging them to let me, can I work for you? Can I work for you? And Ben Bova, who was the fiction editor at the time, he was going on a trip. He was going to the Worldcon in 1979 or 80 in Brighton, England, and he was going to be away for 3 weeks or something. And I was going to California and going away for 3 weeks. But we overlapped 1 week, and I said, and he had no assistant. He had a secretary who knew nothing about fiction or science fiction. Usually you have an assistant who reads the slush.
Right.
He had a slush pile that, very high. So I said, when you get back, I can finish reading through your slush pile. And at first he said, he didn't know me from a hole in the wall. At first, let me think about it. And then he finally said, okay, yeah, sure, come on in and read the slush pile while I'm gone. And I did. And I can't believe he trusted me with it, though, but he did. What can I say? And then at one point he said, okay, here's a story, line edit the first 2 pages or something. And I don't know what I did. And he went over the page with me, 2 pages, and said, why did you do this? Why did you do that? That is the extent of anyone teaching anyone how to edit. And that's really not,
No.
It's not. I mean, it's like you get it or you don't get it. And, I mean, one of the interesting things, Ed Bryant, who died recently, he was someone who wrote for me sometimes for OMNI a lot. He was great. He was a really good writer of horror. He started out in science fiction, ended up writing a lot of horror. And every time I'd buy a story from him for OMNI, he would challenge me. It's like I would do my line edit. I mean, there's a substantive edit where you go over the whole thing and you see that everything seems to be in place, the structure's right, the characters are okay, and blah, blah, blah. But then the last thing you do is a line edit, which is a line-by-line edit.
Okay.
And usually when I do a line edit, I'll send it to the writers. Of course, there was no email then. But anyway, you send it to the writers, and then you go over it by phone. And he would challenge me on everything, which forced me to actually be coherent about why I was doing something. Because, to me, it was instinctual. I just did it. And I didn't think about why I'm doing it. It's just, well, it reads better. Okay. And but his challenging me, and we were friends, so it was like not adversarial really.
Right.
But he challenged me and said, well, and then I would have to explain why whatever it is didn't work for me, which was actually very useful as a learning experience. So I know it's skipping some things, but because there's memory gaps. What can I say?
Oh, sure.
I don't know what made me realize, I want to be in publishing.
Right.
I don't
know
what? I don't know how I knew what publishing was and what it entailed and what the aspects of publishing were. That's what I don't know how I learned.
And you know what? I think and I'm not going to say it doesn't exist now, but I think once upon a time, that's really how a lot of people learned on their way up. Like either working at a certain company for X amount of years or going from here to there. But you kind of even if you had gone to school, this is how you really learn stuff.
Well, people still do, and there are internships in publishing.
Right.
I mean, I think something invaluable is reading slush. I mean, I don't read slush much anymore, but it's something very valuable.
But it was
you kind of realize all the mistakes being made and what people say. Don't you get inured to? How do you know something's good? It's like, especially with slush. Believe me, once you're reading a lot of slush, it jumps out at you when something's really good.
Right. Right. Well, I was about to say, because after a while, it's like I'm sure that very shortly into the story, you're like, okay, either this is great or forget it.
Right. And usually for slush, it's
Yeah,
If something
right.
is
Okay.
not slush, I may think I'll give this person a little more leeway because I know that they're a writer, a professional writer, or especially if I've worked with them before.
Hmm.
And if I've worked in them before and love most of their stuff, I'm usually more patient. You know,
Right.
if it's someone who I know, well, why are they doing this, and is it working or not? You know, and I have to
Right.
make that judgment. That's a different judgment than when you're reading slush because you just assume they don't know what they're doing. With someone who
Right.
has been writing for a long time, when they do something odd that may kind of make you you assume that they're doing it intentionally, but you even so you have to ask. You know, when on the
Sure.
end during the editing process, if you buy the story, you have to ask: Is this intentional? Do you mean this person to be a total asshole, or is it an
Right.
accident?
Right. Right. And I imagine you've had conversations where maybe they explain it like, yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to come
Well,
across
then you
with.
have to say, well, are you going to hold the reader's attention, or are they going to just say, screw it, I don't want to read this about this person? I mean, no, seriously, that's your decision as a writer. I mean, that
Yes.
happened. I had a story years ago that I really liked the story. I liked the plot. I liked the background. And I thought the protagonist was a complete and utter misogynist asshole. I did get, I mean, he was. I mean, and I don't know if he was supposed to be as much of an asshole. And I actually challenged the writer on it. He
Uh-huh.
did make some changes. I still think the guy was too much of a jerk. I
Okay.
mean, I just hated him. And, you know, you can hate a character, but you're taking a real chance if he's the main character and we're supposed to empathize with him. You know,
Right.
if you're
Oh,
supposed
because
to
he was the
be,
main character. Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I could see
Side
where that's
character
could be a
doesn't matter.
problem.
Like, although you have to even the side characters, the secondary characters, if they're not believable in their assholery, they're not. That's not
Mm-hmm.
going to work either. If they're just totally evil, and I mean, depends on the situation with the story. If they're meant to be evil, and yes, they do this, 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 and they're horrible, 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 you don't have to delve into their background. You don't have to delve into why are they being
Why
evil.
are they that way?
That depends on the story.
Mm-hmm.
For other secondary characters, if they're playing an important part, even if they're evil, you don't want to make them one-dimensional. Even evil people should have,
Right.
I think, in a character anyway, should try the writer should try to make some kind of dimension to that character.
Right, because I imagine also in a short story you've got X amount of words or
Yeah,
whatever to explain because it's exactly what you don't want somebody that's totally good or totally the most interesting characters are the ones that even if they're predominantly bad or evil,
have something
there's
at
more to them than
least
that. Or
relatable to them.
right, or even the hero is not such like, oh, you know,
No, if
you're
they're
you're
totally
so straight, you know, and the you're always on the straight and narrow, and there's no kind of like because human beings are not like that, I guess is what I'm
right,
saying. But
yeah.
then
Well,
of
see,
course
that's
with a
what
short
makes
story you've only
believable
got X
character.
amount of space to kind of like get that across like
But you can. I mean, you can.
yeah.
But that's it. Lack of space is no excuse for bad writing. Really. I
Yeah,
mean, you
I
can
believe
write.
it.
I mean, I've read stories that are 3,000 words that are fully realized. I mean, it's harder in science fiction, okay? Science
Hmm.
fiction, world building too. But say in most
Right.
stories, certainly in horror, you can have a short story, a short, really short. Flash fiction's another thing completely. And it can, I have always said I loathed flash fiction because I didn't think it worked, but I actually saw a bunch that did work, so I take that back. But okay, let's say 2,000 words are up 2 to 5,000 words, you should have, and that's enough space to accomplish what you want to. Um, and that means by accomplishing, I think you need to have at least, if not a positive character, at least a relatable character and situation that's believable and that works, you know, as a story and a plot, you know. And I think good writers do that all the time,
And let me
you know.
ask
And I
you
guess it's a
because
skill.
one of the things like especially in science fiction, you know, once upon a time like you say Rad Bradbury and even earlier before that, you know, with the advent they wrote a lot of science fiction that a lot of it is kind of reality in a way now.
A lot of it's fantasy. I mean, a lot of Bradbury stuff wasn't science fiction at all. It was more fantasy, but it was beautiful.
Fantasy. And
But it was
but what I'm
beautiful.
saying is that now you kind of see I've seen almost like the next, you know, in other words, the imaginings of okay, where's the science fiction fantasy thing going now? It's like, because a lot of what was maybe once upon a time purely imagination that didn't exist is kind of
Doesn't
either
exist.
now or very possibly soon.
Right. Yeah.
So, well, are you looking at new forms of, like, and I've seen that a lot of these dystopian future kind of things, like Blade Runner-ish kind of stuff, but then it's like,
Well,
okay,
I mean,
but
you
it
can
always
have. I
has
mean,
to be dark.
it doesn't have to be dark. Well, if you're going to be realistic, there has to be the possibility of dark. I mean, if it's
Right.
totally happy and bright, it's like that's just so unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I've been publishing more science fiction on Tor.com than I have. I used to publish more fantasy and horror. I've been looking for more science fiction, although I'm still publishing the other things.
Right.
And some of the stories they're elegiac in a way. I mean, they're for Earth, like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, are we going to survive what we're doing to it or not? And if we are, how are we going to survive?
Right.
So the stories of both. I mean, like the Martian Obelisk, which is up for the Hugo, I think, and for the Locus Award. It's fun. Anyway, it's up for a bunch of awards by Linda Nagata. Is about a future Earth where a woman sculptor is creating a sculpture on Mars. I think it's
Okay.
Mars. Um, I'm not sure how it's done, but there are no humans on. Actually, there are humans on Mars. That's a whole problem. She's building something. Yes, it's called the Martian Obelisk. So yes, there are people. She's building it remotely. Okay,
Okay.
with the money of some rich guy. Okay, she's on Earth. Earth is not doing well. There have been disasters and things, and so the Martian project has kind of been killed off. But
Okay.
then there's survivors there who need whatever she has in the thing she's building. She's building this edifice, this monument to Mars and to the Mars exploration, and
Okay.
she has to make the decision: am I going to try to save these people who, of course, won't last long? I mean, maybe they will, but they're still human. Or
Mm-hmm.
and destroy my monument to this what I did, or
Right.
do I, and what do I do? And so, I mean, it's that kind of dilemma. It's dealing with the past, the future, and the present, and it's actually very moving, and it's
Okay.
also has a bit of hope at the end. And I think that to me is a wonderful perfect kind of science fiction story that is useful for today. I mean, to say that it's going to be, oh yeah, forget everything, don't bother doing anything, don't create anything, let's all just die,
Right.
is
Right.
really depressing. But on the other hand, on some level, it's not unrealistic, considering everything going on.
Right. Well,
So, but I think it's science fiction's job is to extrapolate from today what the future could be.
right.
And there
Exactly.
are a lot of things called science fiction. And in the old days, a lot of things called science fiction that weren't in the past also. And I mean, to move from science fiction to ghost stories. I mean, when I was doing research for the ghost story anthology,
Mm-hmm.
which is the originals, I was looking for a couple of classic public domain stories. And I was looking through all these books I had that have ghost stories in the title from like the 30s, 20s.
Okay.
And most of them aren't ghost stories. It's like, okay, there's supernatural stories, but there are no ghosts in them whatsoever. I said, wow, that's interesting. So how do I know this book has any ghost stories? Do I have to skim every story in the book? Yeah. So
Okay.
basically, terms change. And like in science fiction, there's a lot of really interesting work being published today. I wouldn't consider it science fiction. It doesn't have to necessarily have science in it, but it has to have something, to me, to be called science fiction. It
Okay.
needs to have something to do with the future, either considering the future in some way,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and extrapolating from today things that could be happening in the near future or far future.
Okay.
So I forget what the
So
question
what do you
was.
consider those? More like fantasy then versus science fiction as
Yeah,
far
I
as
mean,
okay.
yes, they're fantasy, I would guess. I mean, and there's something now called SF fantasy. I mean, there is a combined kind of story that feels hard-edged fantasy that feels like science fiction, but
Mm-hmm.
actually is fantasy, and science fiction that feels like science fiction. No,
Right.
vice versa. That fantasy that actually is science fiction. It has certain science fictional aspects to it, and science fiction that is actually fantasy. And Michael Swanwick does a lot of that. I mean, his story Radio Waves years ago that I published in OMNI online, I think it was. it was about radio waves, but it was actually a fantasy. So I mean, it mixes, and that's fun. That's great. But is it science fiction? No, not really when you kind of analyze it.
And let me ask you, do you see any overlapping, like with horror, the horror genre, and either sci-fi or fantasy?
Well, there always has been science fiction horror. It's a whole subgenre. The Fly, Lennington versus the Ants, The Thing. I mean, Who Goes There by John Campbell, who made into The Thing. I mean, that's classic science fiction horror. So that's always been a subset of horror. I mean, there are different kinds of horror. Terror tales, which are kind of like Psycho and things like that. There's the science fiction horror like The Fly and the Body Snatchers and things like that.
Right.
And then there's also now I'm blank. I always talk about this, and I forgot the name. Conte Cruel, Cruel Tales, where are just kind of the inhumanity to man.
Right.
Thing that's a whole other subset.
Right. Yeah.
And it can be it's usually psychological, not supernatural at all. That kind.
Right. Like.
And then there's also terror tales can mix. I mean, Stephen King does supernatural plus psychological horror together in the same book.
Yes, exactly.
So, so it's always been around. I mean, it's always been subsets of horror. I do think that dark fantasy is different from horror, that there's a different in degree and in tone, in my opinion. They're different. And then there's weird fiction, which can be horror, but doesn't have to be horror. But it's
wow.
So, and it all can be mixed. I mean, it doesn't.
And I know. I kind of understand where you're coming from, because you see all these different stories, and of course you pick up on all these subtleties, because, like you said, you've I imagine part of what you've always done is to categorize what is this story, what is it.
The only time it matters is when I'm doing my year's best horror, and I say, okay, is that horror? Do I consider it horror or not? And if I consider it horror, and I love it, I'll take it. And it can be pretty messy in the fact of what the category is. I published a story on Tor.com called by Theodora Goss, which is oh my God, I can't remember the title. Come See the Living Dryad. And I was on the Locus email to discuss what was the best of the their Locus list for the best of the year kind of thing. And several people really liked that story. I really liked that story. And then they say, but it's not fantasy. It's mainstream. I said, what? It's like, oh, you my son of a gun, it is. I mean, there is nothing fantastic in that story. But it's still a great story, and I think it's just made the Locus Award ballot. Well, it's not fantasy or science fiction or horror for that matter. So, but it's a really good story about perception of what is real and what's not real, we can say, maybe.
Okay.
I mean, it's based on a true affliction where people have growths coming out of them. And in this world, I mean, in this story, I forget when it takes place, the 1800s and 1900s, the carnival has this woman who they call her the living dryad, because she's got, she looks like branches coming out of her.
Okay.
But it's a real medical condition.
Wow.
That it's based on. So, but, but it feels like fantasy, even though when you actually analyze it, it's not. But
right,
so
and that's really interesting because, back then, those freak shows, they would have people with a lot of deformities and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, so it's kind of interesting. Do readers care? I don't know. No, most of them don't. I mean, I published what I didn't see by Karen Joy Fowler, which was an answer to the Women Men Don't See. And it got I published it in OMNI, and I think one reviewer, whose name I won't mention, hated it so much, I think he got it on the Nebula ballot and it won. I mean, he was railing about it, that it wasn't, to me that one was horror. I mean, it was, but there was no science fiction in it, no fantasy in it. It was mainstream in the sense that nothing supernatural or even scientific necessarily happened, but it was in response to this classic story by Tiptree, and to me it was horrific. So, and no one complained except this jerk.
Well, there's always got to be the dissenting voice.
Right, there always has to be a jerk.
And as far as, and you were mentioning to me before that now you're working on an anthology of ghost stories, as in,
Ghost stories. Well, hauntings and stuff. Actually, I finished it. It's coming out in the fall.
Oh, it
I mean,
is. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I finished. I just went over the copy edit. God help me.
And
Yeah, it's 227 or
that
226,000
is
words, and all but 3 stories are new. So yeah, I have stories by Alice Hoffman, original story, and Joyce Carol Oates, and
okay.
a whole bunch of other people. I think Brian Evans. I can't remember who's in which books of mine anymore. I'd have to look at the table of contents.
Were you looking for, did you come across any story? I mean, like you said, some of these authors are well known, and we were discussing sometimes every once in a while they'll write these stories that I imagine what they
Well,
don't.
some people. I mean, Alice Hoffman has been writing ghost stories and weird stories for a long time. I mean, I've followed her from her first book, Property of, which was mainstream, but then she published other books that have been fantastical. Don't ask me to remember the titles because I'm blanking. Um, Practical Magic was one that was
Right,
finished.
exactly,
Okay,
yes.
so she's done fantasy, and Joe, my in-house editor, knows her, and so he was able to put me in touch with her, and I asked her for a story, and she came up with one. Joyce Carol Oates writes a lot of grotesquerie and horror and fantasy. Not
Hmm.
fantasy as much as horror, but I asked, and when I asked Joyce, she either comes up with the story right away or she doesn't respond, basically. Either she'll send it's like, wait, don't send me this story. I haven't sold the anthology yet. It's like, oh no. That happened with one anthology, but anyway, it's like, yeah. I mean, she'll either write it right away when she's got the urge, or she won't do it. She won't have an idea. So, but some of them, yeah, and Brian Evanston, I think, is in it. I'm pretty sure. I mean, he's known as a mainstream writer, but he writes a lot of horror. A
Yes.
lot of stuff is horror and dark. So the book is not just ghosts per se, but kind of hauntings of people. It's more broad than that, and I actually have some new writers, people who I haven't worked with before.
Okay.
Um, so that's interesting. Aliette Boudard is in it. She's, I believe she's French Vietnamese. Excuse me. And I'm going to get his name wrong. I'll use his nickname, Inda Das. He wrote he's Indian, East Indian.
Okay.
And he wrote a really good story for me that uses that background, a ghost story. So that was kind of, so I reached out to people whose work, well, that's what I always do for my anthologies. But because this was so big, I could take the chance on people who I hadn't worked with before, but whose work I like. That's
Right.
something, that by seeing these people's work that I considered for the year's best or whatever, this is how I become aware of some of them, or
Right.
hearing about them. It's like, yeah, I'll see if that person can write a good story for me in this theme.
Right,
Yeah.
because I personally, I mean, as far as ghost stories, I mean, especially now, some of these movies are they're too over the top. I don't know. I like my ghost stories on the subtle side in the sense of like
Creepiness.
creepiness, exactly. Like,
Yes. Well, yeah,
get
creepiness
me
is good.
there and but don't drown me in blood or nothing, none
Yeah,
of
well,
this.
I mean, blood's okay in small amounts,
It's like,
but
yeah,
ghosts don't necessarily have to have blood. I mean,
right,
it's antithetical of the ghost, actually. Did you see the ghost
exactly.
story with the guy in the sheet? I thought that was great. I
Well,
forget. I
yeah,
think it's called Ghost.
that prototypical that you
It
think
was
of it.
really weird. I mean, it really worked on you. It gained momentum as it kept going, and it was very sad and weird. Did you see that?
No, I've seen it, but I mean, I know which one you're talking about, but I have not seen it. No.
I think it's called A Ghost Story or
I
something
was
like
gonna
that.
say it's got like a very like
Yeah. Yeah, it's very,
self-explanatory
yeah, but it's
title.
really kind of interesting. I mean, it's initially you think, oh, come on, this has to be a joke, but it
Right.
actually kind of really gets you.
Right. And I guess that's what I'm talking about as far as one of these, that tension builder as far as
Right.
whether
Well,
what's
suspense
happening or
versus
what's
gotcha.
discovered and
Yeah.
of course the supernatural, in somewhere in there of course, but yeah, like I said, I like my ghost stories on the more subtle. To me, that's more
Mhm.
terrifying at the end that you're
Sure.
like, wow,
Yeah, like wow, that's really creepy.
that's
Yeah,
really
I mean, I'm
creepy.
not scared. I mean, when people say they want to be scared by fiction, it's like, are you really scared by reading something? I mean, I'm not. I mean, I don't get scared from reading something. I don't expect it. How can you expect to be scared by reading
Right.
something? I mean, if maybe I mean, you may be disgusted by it. I mean, or,
Yes.
I mean, by scared, do you actually think this is going to happen to you now? That's the only reason you would think you're scared of something, that this is actually going to come out and get you right now. It's like, no, I expect to be creeped out, maybe disgusted occasionally.
Right.
But I don't expect to be scared by anything I read in
Right.
fiction.
Or when you get towards when you're coming into that end, that all of a sudden things make sense or things come into
Yeah, you
place.
suddenly realize, oh my God,
Right. Like,
that is really,
wow.
oh my gosh. Yeah, but does it scare you? It just disturbs you. It makes you uneasy and disturbs you. And
Right.
it may last. It may last, but to me, a
Right.
scare means something's going to happen to you personally. I mean, that's
Yes.
to me what scaring means, and I'm sorry, I don't buy it.
Right. And, no, and to
And I
me,
don't believe people who say they want to be scared even understand what they're talking about, frankly.
well, and also to me, it's like the good stories are the ones that years will go by and you still remember them.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That you'll say, God, that story was so good, and then years will go by, and maybe you won't, but you know that story, and then others just kind of fade
Yeah.
away, like,
And there's stories that I can't read again that well, okay, a movie, for example. When I saw The Thing, Carpenter, The Thing in preview,
right.
and I haven't been able to watch it again since. And I think I'm almost ready, maybe, to watch it again.
Mm-hmm.
That so freaked me out. Freak out, okay, but it didn't scare me in a sense that
Right.
it happened to me. But it sure freaked me out. And the chest burster scene in Alien always gets me. But that's like, whoa. It always, no matter how many times I watch it.
Right, exactly. And
But
then
does
this
it
is the
scare
thing,
me?
because the
Not
settings are
exactly.
so fantastical, chances are you're never going to find yourself there.
Yeah, right. I mean, it'll startle me for a minute, but does that
Right.
mean it's scaring me that I actually think it's going to happen to me? No.
Well,
No.
and I believe that Cameron, that part with the chest burster, he
Yeah.
didn't. The
Oh,
only ones that were
didn't
in
tell
on
us
it
that.
was John Hurt, but none of the other cast knew
I
exactly what
know.
was going to
I know.
happen.
That was mean, but good.
Anyway, I didn't know that. I found that out later on, and then it's true when you look at that scene again and you look at all their faces, you could tell they're like totally wigging out,
Uh,
like I'm supposed to be acting, but I'm not because.
yeah, right. Sure.
But yeah,
Yeah. And there are stories that I have read that I don't really want to read again. They're so disturbing,
yes,
but I also can't forget them.
right, exactly, and of course, I imagine also it has to do also with a person's imagination. I personally have a very good imagination, and to me, the good story is the one that you're like wishing. I wish I didn't have such a good imagination because this is
Yeah,
wow.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
I mean, there's scenes from movies that get me, but it's more the text, I think. For the movies that get me, there's scenes like the chest bursting scene,
mhm.
and the scene in The Thing where the doctor puts his hand in the guy's chest and his hands are cut off,
You
and
know
then
what?
he runs.
I don't
You didn't
personally, and I
see
tell
it?
everybody, I'm not really into these slasher films that have come
Oh
out,
no, not
and so
either.
on. I was
But
like, ah,
that was
forget
The
it.
Thing. You never saw The Thing?
Oh, no, the thing, absolutely, the original one.
No, no, I mean the Carpenter
Oh,
one.
the Carpenter, of course. I love it
Well, that's the one that
because
that freaks me out. Yeah.
it's
But I remember when I was a kid. Okay, when I was a kid and watched The Thing, the original Thing with James Arness,
mm-hmm,
we used to get Channel 9 and 11, and they were really crappy. You would get snow on them, right?
right,
And so I always assumed that you couldn't see The Thing clearly because of the snow not from the snow on the movie, but snow in the TV.
right,
So years later, like maybe 15 years ago, Film Forum had the original The Thing there. And nope, it was done deliberately. I mean, it wasn't the TV station.
right,
It was snow, and they did it deliberately so you couldn't see because he was like, I guess, supposed to be a giant carrot with James Arness.
right, exactly.
So it's like, oh, okay. I thought it was because of the TV. So I guess they kind of fudged it after all, didn't they?
Well, and the thing was also with a Carpenter was besides the obvious, the thing, it was that psychological thing that you didn't know
Yeah,
if
who
the
is it?
person next to you was the thing or a
Oh,
real
the
human.
ending's great. Yeah, yeah. It was terrific. Right.
Right. And even at the ending was great, which is like what happened with these guys? Was one of
Yeah,
them
I
the
know.
thing?
They're waiting and waiting. It's like, okay.
Do
Yeah.
they die of
Did you,
exposure or
did you see, have you read Peter Watts' story, The Things?
no?
It's a story and it's kind of from the Things point of view. So
Oh,
it's not a horror story, I don't think.
wow.
I
Because, well,
think, I mean, it was, I can't remember. I think it might have been published originally in FNSF. I'm not sure. And everyone was taking it for the year's best a year. It came out maybe 5 years ago. I didn't take it partly because everyone else was taking it, partly because it's not a horror story. It's from the point of view of the thing. He's not a horror. I mean, it's not horrific. It's like it's a life cycle. What's the big deal? It has to do
well,
that again.
yeah, and you're absolutely right. When you look at it from that angle, like you're not the
It's
human on
not
the
a
receiving
monster
end.
story. It's like a survival story.
Hmm.
I have to read it again. It was good.
Right. And that's
The Things by
the
Peter
things
Walker.
I wasn't aware. But you know what? There's always a good way to look at things, like, well, the things, but stuff like that. That some of, like, either whether it's a movie, but let's say in this sense, the books. You know, in some, and I'm a big one that when they make, whether it's a novel or a short story or whatever, they make it into a movie. I'm so disappointed when they kind of like mess it up because
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
why
but
did they
sometimes I
do
mean
that?
I saw Let the Right Thing In, Let the
No,
Right
let
One
the
In.
right thing.
The
Oh my
original,
God, let
I
the
saw the
right one
movie
in, or
first.
something like that.
It Let the Right One In, the original.
Ah,
It's
yes.
and I loved it. I saw the movie first, and then I read the book. The book was a little different and interesting, but I actually probably because I saw the movie first, I liked the movie better.
Mm-hmm.
But it's quite good. I mean, both the book and the movie.
Right. And it's like,
And I actually saw the remake, which was okay, but not as good as the
right. It's
original.
very, it's kind of sad, but at the same time scary. But you know,
Oh yeah,
it's
yeah.
almost like, yeah, yeah. I like that. That was one of those that got you, and it wasn't because it was that horrific per se, even though at the end you realize it is, and that feeling that you get in some stories at the end of, like, oh man, you're too late. You're out of luck. Like, how do you? And I think that's also one of the things I like in stories, like, even though it's kind of fatalistic, where there's no
You're stuck.
finality. In other words, it's not one of these where it ends up like the good person or the hero or heroine
Goes
triumphs
wins. Yeah.
and whatever the bad thing or bad person is vanquished. It's always that.
There's at
Um,
least neutral, or they lose something. That's the difference between that and dark fantasy. Dark fantasy has happy endings. Horror doesn't. I mean,
okay,
horror might have a neutral ending where you know that even if things come out okay, that there was a cost
right.
to the world, to the person, whatever.
Something, whatever the
Dark
context is.
fantasy, it doesn't have that. Dark fantasy, I don't think. That's how I distinguish between the two.
Okay, and that's, yeah, and that's and don't get me wrong, I'm not into, like, I'm not and into the always unhappy ending, because there's some
Oh,
that it's
right.
like you're
Well, yeah.
never
I mean, I don't
gonna.
want to be depressed every time I watch something or read
Yeah, I
something.
know, it's like, but at the same time, you always want to think at the end, or what I like, my personal taste is that this character or characters always, whatever, are not the same as they were at the beginning because of
Yes.
what
Right.
happened to them.
Right. Well, that's good for any. It's a good rule of thumb for almost any piece of fiction
Hmm.
that the protagonist should change in some way,
Right.
or learn something, or whatever.
Right. Well,
Well,
and
I
usually
mean,
the
not
kind of the
everything. I mean,
horror kind of
there are
thing is that it doesn't, that something is taken from you
yeah. Well, in horror, yes. Yeah.
because of what happened or you
I mean, I'm
saw.
thinking of some thrillers. I mean, some crime books and things that I've liked a lot. That the character who goes through these things. I mean, they're not horrific. It's
Hmm.
it's dark crime maybe. I mean, it's maybe bloody, but I'm not
Right.
sure the characters change all that much, and I'm not sure it matters for that kind of a book.
Hmm.
I guess I'm thinking of the Parker stories by Parker books by Donald Westlake writing as Richard Stark. You probably haven't read them. I mean,
No.
it's Richard. I mean, it's about this character Parker. He's a thief, professional thief,
Okay.
but he's willing to kill people too. And anyway, I love those books, and I haven't read them in order, and I didn't read them all, and I haven't read them for a long time. And I don't. I mean, I know probably at the end he changes. He probably doesn't want to do it anymore. But other than that, I'm not sure he changes from book to book, and I'm not sure that matters for that series because that's why I'm just mulling this over for a different genre.
Right.
That matter as much.
Right. And then there's, You know, like you've seen it like almost like before psychopaths were usually the villain through and through, and
Yeah, and
all
so
of a
they're here.
sudden it's kind of tilted the other way around where they're the hero, like Dexter. Like what was it, the original,
Well,
the
I
dream,
really enjoyed
darkly
Dexter,
dreaming
but there are
Dexter, or something
some.
like that.
What drives me nuts is when they become these super villains that are like impervious to kill to death, and they're smarter than everyone else, and they
Right.
never get caught. And it's like after a while, it gets really boring. It's like I
Yes.
don't buy this anymore. I'm sorry. This is like this person is so seductive they can seduce anyone into doing whatever they want and like kill those people. It's like and no one catches them ever. I mean, they don't make any mistakes. I don't buy it. I think most people killing get caught for other reasons, like carelessness of the
Right.
cops, or it's not they're super villains and so smart. And I think that does. I'm not sure that's such a great, I don't know,
Well,
trope to have the super
well, yeah.
villain who's.
Like
I mean,
some
it
of.
worked with Hannibal. I love those books. Thomas
Mm-hmm.
Harrison's Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs are brilliant.
Right.
And I even like the third one was at Hannibal. But beyond that, then it's like, oh come on, give me a break.
Right. Well, like in the Silence of the Lambs, you're thinking, okay, this guy, but he was in jail. He had been captured, in other words, and that he was very brilliant, but at the
Uh-huh.
same time, he was a psychopath that ate his victims.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
and
So don't make him a hero.
but it was like, yeah, you kind of like, and then the book is they're coming to him for help. In other words,
Right. Yeah.
help us
But
out
I think
here.
that worked. I think that worked.
But
I'm
at the
not sure
same
if the
time,
later
it's
books
like,
worked.
don't forget this guy was preying on people,
Hmm.
and
Yeah, sometimes they're innocent. They're not always horrible people who he kills and eats.
yeah, it's like it's like, but yeah, I've seen that lately, and where all of a sudden the villain becomes the hero or the anti-hero. I don't know what you want to call them, but it's like,
Mm.
yeah, but you know, psycho, being a psychopath
Is
or
not good. Not a good thing.
not a good thing. Not a good thing. And it's like, or a sociopath or none of that. Nah, not really. Leave him as
Yeah.
a villain if you want to make him, a little bit of interesting. But once you're into killing other humans, you know, like when, in other words, voluntarily. But yeah, I've seen a lot of that as far as like, yeah, I'm not into that. It's like, I like my heroes human, but heroes in the sense of the main
Mhm.
characters, that kind of thing, because otherwise. And let me ask you, I saw that you did an anthology, something called the Doll Collection. What is that about? Dolls? Because I
Yep.
know there's a lot of people out there that have a thing about dolls.
Yes, I have a lot of doll heads around. You might be able to see some behind me. I don't know. Oh, maybe. There's a little one here. Most of my doll heads are all over the place, but
Okay.
I'm into dolls. And I've been into doll parts for a while. There's one up there. Oh, but you can't see it. Um, and for a long time, I wanted to do a book of stories about them. And it took a while to get it together. Usually it takes me a while to get it together to say, okay, I really am serious about this. Should I write up a proposal? And should I
Okay.
ask people if they're interested in writing for it? And that's basically how it works. So, yeah. So, yes, it came out few years ago from Tor Books. And it's all stories about dolls. Dark fantasy. One science fiction story, I think.
Let me tell
Kind
you
of
something.
science fiction. But mostly dark fantasy and horror.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's something about
The
what's
uncanny
considered a
valley.
child's toy
Yeah.
that has
They're not
something.
all child's toys. But I didn't want, I asked people to avoid writing about Chucky or anything like that. Although Ramsey Campbell did do Chucky Goes to Liverpool or something. He allowed
Chucky goes to
but it
Liverpool.
was
That's good.
something like that. But it wasn't about Chucky really. It was about something else. But I allowed him to do that.
Right. Well, it's
You have to direct. If you have a theme anthology, you want to make sure you don't get the same story on the theme. You need to
sure.
get people to broaden their scope in what they're
Right.
writing about.
Right.
So
Because
I don't. Hmm.
yeah, most. I
So
mean, when you think
I
of a
don't tell them what I
prototypical
want. I
doll,
tell
it's
them
a
what I'm
child's
doing.
toy,
Hmm. Yeah.
and I mean, there's a whole set of people out there that they're like, how there were people that were scared of clowns. Now there's a whole set of people
I
that
know.
are
I
scared
know.
of dolls.
Uh, eh. I'm not scared of clowns. I just hate them. The difference.
Can you imagine how things have changed once upon a time? Clowns were like the circus mainstay, and now I remember one time I went to a garage sale, and there was, the cover
Yeah.
of it was the character of that Tim Curry played. And it
Uh-huh.
was like brand new, and this lady, and oh my God, I bought it. She tells me, she comes over, she goes, she goes, I'm getting rid of it because I was reading and I would have it on my nightstand. And I couldn't look at the cover when I was going to sleep because
Hmm.
it just made, and now, even now, after I finish reading, I just want to get rid of it. And it all
Okay.
had to do, forget the story, it was the cover,
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
clown
Well.
thing.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I edited an anthology called Nightmare Carnival, and I said, "Please, no killer clowns." And of course, on the cover, I mean, they did put other things, but there is a clown on it. It's like I wish they hadn't done it, but
Well,
what can you
because
do?
now it died away, but what, about a year ago, everybody was seeing clowns everywhere.
Oh, were they?
Yeah, it was, I'm sure some of these, you know, people were dressing up as clowns and being seen by schools, and there were people were calling the police, and it got out of hand. And I know there was a bunch of people probably running around trying to wig out the public, but it
Yeah,
was like, how did this
probably.
thing take off? Like
Thanks,
people.
thanks to Stephen King.
Well, yeah, I know Steven is like, man, talk about, yeah, he's that's that, and I think that's one of his most powerful, though, as far as that he takes the common, the ordinary,
Hmm.
and he makes it into
Yeah,
something really horrible.
yeah, yes, yeah, sure.
So anyway, Ellen, thank you so much. It has been wonderful to talk to
Oh,
you.
you're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
When is this ghost? Because that's my favorite
It's called
absolute.
it's called Echoes, the Saga Anthology of Ghost Stories. It should be out in October, I believe. But right now, I have this book out. This just came out, The Devil of the Deep, which is sea horror.
Really?
That's out from Nightshade. Yeah, it's in hardcover and trade paperback, audio, and ebook. So horror stories of the sea.
Oh my God, yes.
So
That has to
that's
do
just
with what? I take it, what, just monsters, ghost ships, some stuff.
ghost ships. Not that many monsters. I mean, sea monsters, but
Mm-hmm.
there's stuff coming out of the sea, stuff in the sea, uh, hauntings, murders, all kind of stuff.
Yay! Just my kind of stuff. I love it. Yay! I've
Yeah,
got to look
yes.
that up because I'm telling you,
So collected.
sometimes I'm running short on time, and
Mhm.
I'm you probably can't tell, but I have stacks of books all
No,
over
but
the
I've got
place.
stacks all over the place.
You
But
know, I can tell everybody by the time I
yeah,
was 7 years
I know.
old that I got my
Yeah, but
library
short stories
card.
you can watch. You can read a story on the toilet.
Yeah, I know. I've been. I mean, my mom. I would go to dinner. I'd be having a book. And she's like, "Put the book down and eat." That kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So,
well, I got very good at ignoring my parents when they called me to eat when I was reading a book when
yeah,
I was
no,
a
it's
kid.
like, I mean,
Yeah,
have book will travel. That was Marlene's.
right. Yeah, yeah. Well,
So
anyway, it's been a pleasure,
likewise, and I want to
and
thank you again so much. It has been wonderful to talk to you
well,
and gain a
thank you.
little
And
insight. And I will most definitely be looking up that book and looking forward in
cool,
October for
cool.
Halloweeny time.
Yeah, and let me know when this goes up or whatever.
Absolutely, I will let you know about
Yeah,
that.
I have the best of the year coming out in June, and then I have the best of the year coming out in October also, which is the
Really?
first 10 years of the best of the year.
Oh,
So
okay,
yeah.
okay, perfect. Okay, Ellen, take care, darling. Have a
Take
good day.
care. Have a great day.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Oh boy. Oh boy. I'm telling you. I love it. Love it. This is right up Marlene's alley. I know a lot of you also up your alley because otherwise you're going to be looking at the show. But anyway, yes, I love, you know, I love novels like, as in the Stephen King, but lately sometimes, especially with I like short stories, but I know what she means. Well-written short stories that you get it, even if it's a short story. That of course it's got to be. It's like that. It's not a prequel. You know what I'm saying? Because there's some short stories. It's like, okay, all you're doing is just setting me up for the novel. No, I want the whole thing. I want that story in that short story. And sometimes, like I said, you don't have time to do this stuff except I can't. I gotta get that book that deep. Oh my God. I swear well, you guys can't see it upstairs. I mean, even on my stairs, I have boxes and boxes of books. I don't let go of books. And, everybody's got Kindle and stuff. But to me, there's something. As a matter of fact, look what I'm reading right now. The Mammoth Book of Short Horror Novels. See, and I got that right. I'm not kidding. Yes, I am. I love horror, sci-fi. Sci-fi depends. Because some sci-fi sometimes gets too techy for me. I know there's sci-fi people out there that are like, the techier the better. But some of them, for me, if they're too techy, get I fade. But sci-fi, fantasy, horror, ghost. They're doing these genres because I imagine because they recognize there's people that follow certain um like that, from the ocean to sea, all these mysteries and murders and ghost ships, and yeah, baby. Oh, I love that. And I'm I think I'll be reading let's put it this way, the day I stop reading, it's like, take me quick to the hospital, something's wrong with me. Because it does, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love TV, I love television. I wasn't kidding. A lot of times though, I'm really disappointed when they take these great stories and they put them in film, and it's like, why did you do that? You killed it. It was such a great story. Because to me, reading, what was that old show? Reading is fundamental. Reading does something with your imagination. Besides the practical, like I said, I've been reading since as a kid. It helps you with your vocabulary and even with your grammar, and just, but more than anything, okay, it makes your imagination fly. Uh, I'll tell you what, I mean, I consider now, I look back, I even do kind of like a meditation when I'm reading, because I remember as I was growing up, you could throw a bomb next to me, and if I was into that book, what I was reading, that's it. I was gone. I could sit in a room with people talking loudly, and I could zone into what I was reading, and everything would fade out. And by the way, I wasn't always reading just horror or stuff. I read everything, and I was growing up. Besides the ghosts books like Hans Holzer, I read all the Black Stallion books by Farley. I mean, you name it. I did my stint when I was a teenager in the big romance novels that were real big during the 70s, and like Kathleen Woody was. I read everything I could get my hands on. I like reading some biographies, uh, but always my favorite has always been ghost stories, supernatural, suspense, thriller, horror, some true crime. Uh, and like I said, I'm not really that much into the gore. So a little bit is good because it scares you. Nobody wants to get killed. Plus, get killed in a bad way where you suffer. But if that's how you're scaring people, it's like, forget it. I want something more subtle, something that stays with you more, something that's plausible. Um, that you stick, almost like in a way, you want to say, man, that could happen to me. Wow. Or I didn't see that coming, or whatever the case might be. Like I said, that the person or the character, whether it's a short story or a long story, at the end is not the same anymore. Better or worse, changed. Sometimes better. What is it? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, kind of thing. And you know, that kind of, that's the flavor of the stories I like. And for all those would-be writers out there, let me tell you something. She made a very good point. When we're talking about the piano thing and the writing thing and everything, is like, that is how you get better at it, is you write and you write and you write and you write and you write again. And, you submit your stories to anybody who's willing to look at it. If you join a writer's club, and, sometimes a lot of people say, well, God, everything's been played out when it comes to whatever, sci-fi, horror, suspense. But look at what she just said, which I didn't know. You know what? And sometimes when you get busy, you kind of lose sight of what's going on around you. That writer that wrote the story about the things perspective, as in the things. Come on, here was this story that's already been made twice into a film, and they took that idea, but they just turned it around. And sometimes you'd be surprised if you take an idea, but then you insert your reality, not redo it, because you don't want to plagiarize somebody's idea, but you write a different perspective that's totally yours, that's totally different, that's totally fresh. Okay, and sometimes that takes off on its own more so than than people expect. And every writer's different. Like I was saying, Stephen King, to me, he writes about some really, let's face it, Stephen King, his settings are where always? Maine. Little town Maine is where most of his stories are set out of. That's what I meant. It's like always the ordinary, the regular folks, like in Salem's Lot. There's a little town called Jerusalem's Lot, or Needful Things. Where evil just all of a sudden comes in to the lives of these, for lack of a better word, dull people, in the sense of they're just living their lives. And how do they deal with evil? Pure evil. Okay. And I think that's one of the most distressing, creepy things about his books, is that his characters, a lot of them, yeah, they've got their faults and maybe they've got their secrets, but at the end they're kind of ordinary. And then what happens when they stumble across, or they become the victim of, or whatever, of a monster? Whatever the origins are of it. And let me tell you something. I'm really looking forward to that book when it comes out in Halloween time. So again, guys, thank you for being part of my audience. Don't forget to subscribe, whether it's on YouTube or on any of the podcast platforms, if you're listening to the podcast version, so that you can get notified whenever I release a new show. Okay, my true believers, don't forget to send me your stories. I've been getting some fantastic stories. Okay, and like I said, if you don't want to write it, if you don't want to videotape, call me, contact me. Okay, and we'll figure something out. I said this before. I'm also considering doing some live shows and putting in a phone line where some people can call in. The only reason I'm really thinking hard about this is that I know there's always the pranksters I'm being nice about. I don't want to use the word I'm really thinking of. That is going to mess things up, especially when I'm doing a live show. All right. But I'm considering that, doing a phone where people can call in and just talk about it. You don't tell the story. Catch me. I do a lot of live streaming on Facebook and also on Twitter via Periscope. All right. And again, guys, if you have any suggestions for new shows, I got a lot of great guests coming on, a lot of fantastic guests coming on that I know you guys are going to be thrilled with. And I've had a lot of requests to do storytelling, as in some of these ghost stories, like about certain cities or about certain locations. I'm going to be doing some storytelling as far as ghost stories about different places. Like, for example, St. Augustine. That's got all these different ghost stories, and I'm going to see if I can dig up just not the well-known ones, like The Fort, but about other ones that sometimes are older and less well known. For example, as an example, people have been asking for some storytelling. So again, guys, thank you so much, and I look forward to the next time that we are together and we discuss stories of the supernatural.